What's happening, folks? Geologist Philip Prince back in the States this time, talking rivers, specifically really old rivers. Interesting story here coming out of the western edge of Appalachia in southern Ohio. If you look at this screen, you might see sort of a nice meandering shape going right up the middle of it, bottom to top. Big wide valley, about a mile and a quarter wide, 2 kilometers wide. That outlines it. If you're having trouble seeing it, you probably aren't. Interesting landform, to say the least. Not something you see every day, something that's very hard to see without technology like Google Earth or some of the other imaging we're going to see shortly. Down there at the bottom of the screen is the Ohio River, kind of flowing like that towards the left of the screen. It's at about 500 feet above sea level here. That ghostly valley up there is about 710 feet above sea level. So it's quite a bit higher than the Ohio River. And just thinking about what's going on here? Why does this look like this? What does that old valley represent? Is a really cool question. It's one of the more interesting climate related stories that you see in Appalachia. And it lends itself really well to kind of a simple animation that's actually done in PowerPoint here down the road, which I think you might enjoy. But you were just taking that view. We're zoomed way out now, up above Ohio and a little bit of Kentucky down there in the bottom of the screen, and Chillicothe, Ohio, in particular, going to be central to this story here. Now, that is the Ghost River Valley that you were looking at in the previous image there. And there's actually another one to its west. Now, that actually has the Scioto River in it today. So that one does carry a river, but it's a small river. You can look back on the size scale there, the Ghost River Valley on the right, mile and a quarter, 2 kilometers wide, pretty similar scale there for that Ghost Valley that also connects to the Ohio River, and it does again carry a river, but it's really little. So interesting landforms. Why are they here? And specific, why do they stop up there at Chillicothe? Because you don't see any continuation of either of those really strongly defined valleys north of Chillicothe, right? The Ohio down there is a good frame of reference because it's a big river, certainly one of the larger rivers in the continental United States. And you can see that its overall valley, the river itself is not as wide as the valley that you see here in Google Earth. The overall valley itself is actually pretty comparable in its scale to these ghost valleys here. So presumably they must be saying something about big rivers that I don't know, they aren't here anymore, right? So that's an interesting question to try to approach. Cool way to look at this is using digital elevation models. This is digital topography that takes the land cover out of the image. So all you're seeing is topography, and it's color coded by elevation. And you can see that ghost channel on the right there on the east is actually a different shade of green than both the Ohio River and that ghost channel on the left. In this case, that means that it's higher. Like I saw at the beginning there, it's about 200 feet above the Ohio River as it flows today. Highest point in that Ghost Valley would be roughly where that arrow is pointing right there. It's around Stockdale, Ohio. And getting closer to Chillicothe, it is quite a bit lower in that direction. Water likes to run downhill. You may see where that's going. We'll talk about it again here in just a moment. Using these elevation models is a cool way to track these ghost channels. And this is probably an intense image. I'm sure you can see the purple reflecting off my face here, but this color ramp turns out to be a pretty good one to see how modern channels, like these really bright colored ones, actually cut right across this sort of ghostly river. And we're actually south now of anything that you've seen thus far. This is up above Ashland, Kentucky. Ashland sits right on the south side of the Ohio River, and up behind and above Ashland, got that same old ghost channel. And sure enough, its elevation there, it's been carved up by streams that are currently draining to the Ohio. That tends to lower things just a little bit, but it grades pretty nicely into what we've already looked at there on the north side of the Ohio River in southern Ohio. Take it further east. This is in the vicinity of Hurricane, West Virginia, up in what's called the Taze Valley. Probably don't even need to outline the ghostly river channel there. It tends to stand out pretty well. Hurricane sits right in the middle of it. And in this case, Hurricane Creek, which is flowing basically south to north here. So comes in from the right side of the screen and then is flowing up towards the top, ultimately to the Kanawha River. It just cuts right across this old ghostly valley. So sometimes streams make use of the Ghost Valley a little bit, and you can see the way Hurricane Creek kind of parallels the edge of it there. But generally speaking, when you say it's ghostly, it's like it's almost not there. You know, the current landscape features are kind of reshaping it and resculpting it, whatever you like. Back to Ohio, north side of the Ohio River, there's Stockdale up there. Another example of modern day streams that are just like carving this old river valley up. So it's almost like it's not even there at that point. Using these really intense colors are a cool way to do this because not only do they show the extent of the ghostly channel really nicely, it allows that elevation comparison. You can see there's some valleys in here that are closer to the elevation of the ghost channel. There's these really bright white ones that are quite a bit lower. Those are sort of the modern, more active channels, and they're all jumbled in here together. So it makes for a pretty complex landscape, but it's absolutely dominated by whatever this big riverless 1.25 mile wide valley is today. So zooming way out, that's where you were looking in the last image there with that crazy set of purple colors. Throw another elevation model on it, a little bit more tolerable if you're going to have to look at it for a while. Down at your right there, you're seeing some of the higher elevations going into West Virginia in the browns and yellows and whites. Highest point in the what I'll call the Ghost Valley system down there, right? It's just west of Charleston, West Virginia, up in the Taze Valley. It's well up in the 700s feet above sea level, a little bit lower by the time you get up behind Ashland there. Lower yet on the north side of the Ohio, and finally got the lowest up there towards Chillicothe. Now this is variable, as you've seen. Some of the newer channels are kind of cutting this thing up, but absolutely this elevation trend is here, and because water runs downhill, you can put together a nice flow direction for that one set of ghostly channels, right? Pretty clearly flowing from southeast to north until you get up there again to Chillicothe, and you don't see it anymore. Now let's talk about the one to its west up there on the north side of the Ohio River, the valley that has the Scioto River in it today. Highest up there at the top, much lower down there at the Ohio. That makes sense because water is presently draining through it from up there around Chillicothe down to the Ohio at Portsmouth. So that gives you that flow direction. The Ohio itself is flowing east to west in this image. But then channel number one, which is higher in elevation and much more chopped up, was actually flowing the opposite direction. So there's a lot of weird stuff going on here, right? So you have these two old channels that are really big. One of them's almost 200 feet higher than the other one. It flowed in the opposite direction, and they both get up there to Chillicothe and just stop. So this is interesting. And this is going to be simplified in terms of breaking it down to a few sort of big steps, events, whatever you like, in the next slide. But like I said at the beginning, this is climate related. Now, not connecting climate with humans in this case, because this is certainly pre-human, particularly as we know it today. But it's a good example of how climatic factors are sort of the most rapidly formative things that happen on Earth. They can really even outpace like plate tectonics. So what you're seeing here, Eastern North America, got some Great Lakes up there at the top, just barely poking down into the image. Pretend they're not there. Think about North America, pre-glaciation. What you got here is what was called the Taze River. The modern day New River and Kanawha River are reasonably similar to what the upper reaches of the Taze would have been. But you get up here to Chillicothe, and this would have gone out across Ohio and Indiana, Illinois, over presumably to where the Mississippi is today. There's debate about that. Some folks say it might have gone over here into what would have been the roughly Lake Erie neck of the woods and gone out into the St. Lawrence into the Atlantic. I've even heard suggested it went up north, like to Hudson Bay. Not sure about that. The western course here is the one that you certainly hear about the most, and among other things, you can track its bed even where you can't see it because there's a huge amount of river gravel there. In particular, if you're drilling for a water well, you may end up encountering that, and that's how this thing was sort of mapped out in the past. Here, I've also got the modern day Cheat River, turns into or joins, I guess, the Monongahela River. I don't want to upset any Mon River folks. I think the cheat goes down pretty far south. It's got really high elevation headwaters. So geologically, I don't know. I would almost see that as like the ultimate headwater here. You go up past Pittsburgh, which is right there, and in pre-glacial times, this river system, no Lake Erie there, would have gone up and gone out the St. Lawrence, right? So what happened with glaciation? North America had some big ice sheets on it. Global cooling started about 2.5 million years ago or something like that. Takes a while to build up big ice caps and march them across an entire continent, but again, it's actually pretty fast compared to plate tectonics. So here, at maybe a glacial pace, eventually an ice sheet is going to come marching down across North America. And what are those rivers going to do at this point? Well, they're basically dammed up and they're going to make gigantic monster lakes hundreds of feet deep. What are the little green shapes in the lakes? These weren't like open seas or something like that. They flooded existing topography, and they would have been full of really complex kind of ridge and island networks. If you look at a reservoir today that floods a river system that has kind of complex topography, you get really crazy shorelines and intricate little islands. That would have been the case here, and it's actually possible to even look at old shorelines and sediments from these lakes. So they have been studied and mapped to great extent. These are illustrative only, and I wouldn't say I did a terrible job with them, but they're very much generalized. And if you want to know more about them, you could Google Lake Tight, Tight, or Lake Monongahela, and you will see maps that have been produced to exceptional detail. All right, so these weren't engineered lakes. They don't have a controllable dam on them. Eventually, they're going to fill up and sort of start breaching or overflowing. And ultimately, what you see today is the Ohio River sort of took its life from these overflow events that began spilling out of these lakes and making their way southwest, ultimately towards the Mississippi system and the Gulf of Mexico. New Martinsville, West Virginia. Somebody mentioned that in a video comment recently, and that's recognized as one of the places where Lake Monongahela, the upper one here, began to overflow. Now, Lake Tight down here, the one that flooded southern Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, what its overflow looks like, where exactly that occurred, I don't know. Looking at modern topography and trying to figure that out can be tough. And there's also kind of some complexities that go with this. The weight of the ice on the land will actually cause the land surface out in front of the ice to bulge just a little bit. It's called a forebulge. When the ice goes away, that's going to relax and sometimes it'll like collapse back down. How far away from the ice that spreads depends on how thick and strong the Earth's crust is and all kinds of crazy things. But suffice it to say, the general idea that you see here is what's going to explain the modern layout of rivers that you see on the northwest slope of the Appalachians. Gradually, you have glaciation kind of moving away. What you've seen here was sort of like a maximum glacial extent. 750, 780,000 years ago, up to 900,000, a million years ago, something like that. It's actually quite early in the ice ages, and it was a very far south glacial extent. As retreat begins, you get some melting, and melt water is going to come gushing out of that thing and produce what you would call like an outflow channel. Eventually, the ice goes away, and you're left with this landscape you see today that has, among other things, these ghost rivers that go up there to Chillicothe, and a river system that goes up to Pittsburgh and kind of makes that U-turn. So this Ohio network and its headwaters that you see on a map today is very much a direct product of glacial sculpting that ultimately goes back to these big overflowing lakes. So it's kind of a cool connection to climatic process in the sense that ice sheets come down, and even in places that the ice doesn't cover or run over, it can produce these big spin-off effects that reorganize the river systems and stuff like that. So not something that you hear about or think about every day, but absolutely this river network as we know it today, kind of on the again the north side of Appalachia going into the continental interior. That's a product of glaciation, right? So when you go back to the Ghost Rivers, you got this old pre-glacial Taze River that's the high one. That one was flowing up towards the north. It got dammed up. Actually, right up there at the top of the screen, you can see Chillicothe. That's roughly where the ice margin was. So it got dammed up, made a huge lake, big lakes upstream. They started overflowing. That made the Ohio that you see down there at the bottom of the screen. And the ice, as the ice sort of started making its way back, you get that glacial outwash channel that was funneling huge amounts of water, and today just has this tiny little Scioto River coming down it. So cool narrative, and one that's just really great to look at now. Before Google Earth, Google Maps is digital topography. This was much harder to see. I mean, yes, you could see it on topographic maps, on contour maps, but being able to look at it like this kind of opens up a whole new world here. So it's really cool to check out, and it's again pretty easy to find because you can just type in some of these town names, and Google Earth will take you right to it. Looking at the larger scale, with more of this digital topography, this is like a LiDAR image. You call it a stretched hillshade. So the topography is sort of exaggerated here. It's pretty clear to see where glaciation just sort of smoothed the landscape over. And then in areas where you didn't get smoothed over, you still have that rough kind of stream carved topography. Approximate location of Chillicothe's marked there, and that pretty much marks the boundary between those two areas in the landscape. You zoom in even closer, Chillicothe would be right down at the very, very bottom of the screen here. That contrast is all that much more obvious to see. So over to the right there, you have that really carved up, kind of dissected hill and holler landscape that Appalachia is so famous for. And then in the glaciated areas, you got the moraines there, which are these sort of like ridges of sediment actually kind of pushed up by the glaciers. So very much a tale of two landscapes. And you can just see that on Google Earth, like that Appalachia hill and holler country is green because it's still forested, and once you get up into that glaciated area, it tends to be highly agricultural, and that's visible, at the satellite scale. So land use and really and kind of life as you know it is impacted by these processes. So thinking a step further here, you see these cool rivers. They give you a sense of what happened here climatically and geologically. Also, it's worth thinking about what happens when a landscape is suddenly given a much lower elevation river to drain to, right? You might think about that almost in terms of sea level. What would happen if you dropped the ocean 200 feet pretty quickly? That would induce changes in the land, particularly in association with the streams that are flowing across it and were flowing down to that original ocean level because they suddenly got 200 feet farther to drop. Now, in the case of dropping sea level, depending on the slope of what's under the water, that drop might actually produce a lot more land for those streams to flow across. But in this case, it's almost like you're suddenly carving like this new canyon or something for streams to flow into. And that's an idea that lends itself pretty well to a Microsoft Paint diagram. So we'll hop out here and talk a little bit about landscape processes and how the type of landscape you see here, that's Portsmouth, Ohio, down there in the bottom left. Again, really classic rugged Appalachia there. Think about how a landscape like that might have its appearance sort of enhanced or almost exaggerated by an effect like this. So hang on just a minute. All right, so here we are in Paint, and I'm going to try to make this a pretty simple diagram. Of course, I've said that before, I guess, but in terms of thinking about landscape processes, it's kind of useful to see it sketched out. So what we're going to try to do here is make just a very generalized kind of land surface. And that's going to be sloping down to the foreground here. And we're going to put just some kind of a big river down here. It doesn't even really matter which way it's flowing. It's just going to be the low elevation that all of that land area going up towards the top of the window here is draining down to, right? So we'll color in that big blue river down there. And geologists would call this the base level for all of these streams that are going to flow into it, meaning these streams can't flow to any lower elevation than that big river down there. So we'll make up some kind of an interesting looking stream network here. Let's see, going to need to move a zoom window here just a little bit. That should work out. Let's see, we'll tidy some of that up a little bit as well. Okay, so in this sort of starting point landscape here, there will be some topography here, but really just nothing too extreme, right? So these streams will be down in, they'll be in little stream valleys, but it's not a really intensely carved up landscape, but it's also not an entirely flat one either, right? And the most topography that you see there is going to be kind of down along that big river. Now, say we come along with this idea, like I mentioned a moment ago, of suddenly lowering this big river, right? So I'm gonna have to show that the river suddenly drops down, and so our model is going to need to be redrawn, something like this, to come through here and white out where the river used to be as best we are able. I would have taken care of this one with a quick polygon, but I don't know. Sometimes it's easier to do just to do the heavy brush here. So we'll start cleaning all of that up. Get rid of that old river elevation. And then give ourselves a new one here that is much, much lower. And of course, exaggeratedly so, but we're just trying to communicate a general idea here. So we're not going to worry too much about that being a really huge drop there. It's going to get the idea across. Okay, so probably the biggest takeaway from this is where this thing cut down in the landscape there. There's going to be almost like a gorge wall, a bluff, maybe. There's going to be some kind of topographic indication of that. And our stream up here now has to drop its way down to get to that big river. So you didn't make the landscape higher, but you sure made where the streams are going lower. And that's going to give you a chance to start carving some crazy gorges into this landscape. So first step is we got this gorge developing right where that stream is now dropping down to get to the big river. It's going to be like a crazy landscape. There's going to be all sorts of big boulders and rapids and stuff like that down in that gorge. Now, over time, that gorge system, much like Niagara Falls, is going to start carving its way upstream and essentially spreading through the landscape. So we'll just kind of track that spread here. And all we need to do is clear out those channels. They're going to be drawn back in. They just have to be drawn back in what they look like if they were lower down in the landscape. So here our gorge system is starting to make its way further and further there into the landscape. Okay, now our streams are kind of carved down into their own gorges, and you can probably see where this is going. As time progresses, those gorges are just going to keep spreading further and further up through this stream network. And again, you aren't making the land any higher, but you're making the valleys lower, and doing so really rapidly compared to how the rest of the landscape is changing. So the end result is going to be kind of a really impressive network of gorges. And all throughout here, you're going to have rapids and waterfalls and all kinds of really, really exciting topographic features that would not have been there before. And this, of course, is something that you see throughout the Ohio River corridor. So keep it moving. This should look nice when I play it in fast forward at the beginning of the video. I don't know if that is all people watch and they don't come back to this part of the video or not. Whatever. As long as people get a kick out of it, it works for me. So we're just going to keep it rolling here. And I don't know, we may not make it as far as dissecting, chopping up the entire landscape, but we want to make sure that the overall idea here is communicated. So the gorge network keeps making its way back there. And if we were getting really serious about this, this is actually what my PhD is about. If you wondered what I worked on way back when in graduate school in Virginia Tech, early 2000s, it was like landscape response to river changes. So for presentations I give, I would draw stuff like this and put it in PowerPoints. I draw them on a light table and change them a little bit. I have like 20 different panels, so you get almost like a little cartoon movie. Interesting overall effect, quite time consuming. We're going to give this maybe one more phase of spread here, maybe one or two. Kind of a meditative exercise if you just need to check out for a while and you're tired of Wordle or Sudoku or something like that. So at this point, those big stream channels there are pretty well carved up. You'd probably see these kind of crazy gullies and things like spreading up out of this steep slope. Should have drawn some of them in there earlier, but better late than never. And also, you're going to see even the smaller little streams within this landscape start to respond and carve down deeper into the rock. So kind of the future for this whole area is going to be just being carved up to a very extreme degree. So when I was talking about like that characteristically super rugged, super complex Appalachian landscape, this is at least part of it. Due to the geology there, it's always going to be a rough landscape, but you're adding a couple 100 feet of roughness to it with this whole glacial rearrangement story, and it's going to make it even rougher and tighter and more full of interesting rock cliffs and waterfalls and stuff like that. So you very much see ongoing effects of this glacial story, not only in how the rivers are laid out, but also just what the landscape looks like and exactly how far this process has spread away from the Ohio River. Nobody knows for sure. I would say it's gone pretty far upstream, all the way up into Virginia and places like that. But that remains to be seen. But the general idea of what you see here is that idea of landscape response to making the river lower. So, and this is still probably still happening and evolving today. So next time you check out Google Earth, yeah, give a look down there in Southern Ohio. Maybe not the most obvious place for a Google Earth cruise, but once you get into these ghost rivers down there and think about this whole thing, it is very, very nice. Hope you enjoyed this one, and tune in next time.